I've always believed very strongly that women should be part of the decision-making process. I think it's been part of my own philosophy of equality of opportunity, that women should be there making decisions at all levels, sharing it with men. It's always seemed to me terribly imbalanced that so many of the decision makers have been male, and I've always had the view that I would rather be sitting in the seat making the decision and someone lobbying to me than being a lobbyist myself and going to the other way around, because I felt there was no reason on earth why women can't make decisions. They can make very good decisions. When I first made up my mind to stand for the Healesville Council, it was on an issue that I was anxious to have the council take notice of and do something about. And so the thought of either being the first woman this or the first woman Shire President really was never in my mind at that time. And so I stood, and I always remember the Shire engineer, when I put my name in for the nomination, the Shire engineer came over to my husband, who was the local solicitor, and his office was on the other side of the street. And he came over and said to my husband, he didn't say to me, but he said to my husband, "Is your wife fair dinkum?" Because he really couldn't believe that this young woman with these 4 young children was going to stand for the council. And to my husband's great credit, he said, "Yes, she is, and she's got my full support." And it was considered quite outrageous, really, if you were to get into any sort of public life career as a young mother, that you had to be neglecting your children to do it. I must say I was overlooked, being the only woman on the council, to be Shire President for a number of times, until eventually there was a kind of public outcry in the local papers about, that I should have had my turn, so to speak. As far as being the first woman into the Legislative Council, that again was an accidental thing. I had tried several times for pre-selection in both lower house and upper house seats. It was extremely difficult for a woman to get pre-selection. The only way you could succeed would be to go through either of the major parties. To stand as an independent would have been very difficult, and still fairly difficult even today. So I finally got pre-selection for Boronia Province, and the fact that I was the first woman sworn in meant there were 2 women elected at that time, one from the Liberal Party and one from the Labor Party, which I said in my maiden speech I thought was very appropriate, that when women finally sort of scaled the wall or the Bastille of the Legislative Council, that 2 women from the 2 major parties got elected, and I thought that was very appropriate. I got caught up with the Queen Victoria Women's Hospital issue when there was a bill brought to the Parliament in 1989 to sell off the land on which that hospital stood. Knowing the history of the Queen Victoria Women's Hospital, how it was started by a young woman doctor who was the first woman to graduate in medicine, Dr. Constance Stone, in 1896, and a remarkable young woman, really. And she saw the need for a hospital just for women. She was amazed at the high mortality of women, infant mortality and young mothers themselves through lack of proper care and hygiene and education and so on. So that hospital was established with a shilling fund, and the women of Victoria in the 1890s donated a shilling to buy the land to build the hospital. and in 1989 it was to be sold. And it was felt very strongly by women all over Victoria that this should not be sold without any recognition of its past history, and without the women of Victoria having still some place, some building that they could retain from that hospital. We knew that we couldn't save the whole site because it was a big site, but what we wanted was part of the old hospital, the original hospital, and we eventually managed to get that. And so we created a women's centre, and it's grown from strength to strength since then, and I'm still happily involved in it, and applaud the fact that we have that in Victoria, for the women of Victoria.